round. Okay. He, him pronouns, but feel free to address me as a panel or judges. I'd like to also let the other judges to introduce yourself according to the tab order.
Hi, this is Gelson. I'm one of the panelists for the round. I use he pronouns, but feel free to refer to the panel as a whole. And good luck to all teams.
Idris, you can introduce yourself. Idris, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Yeah, you can introduce yourself.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Idris, and I'll be one of your panelists for this one. Congratulations for making it to the quarterfinals, and I certainly wish you all the best.
All right. Thank you. Okay. I have a couple of reminders before we begin the debate. First and primary, don't forget to keep timing your own self since I won't be able to put the timestamp in the chat. I will remind you in case the time is over, but I still highly encourage you to use your own timer. Last but not least as well, do mention if you have preference if you have any before you start the speech. I think since everyone is here and ready, I'd like to invite first propositions to open debate for this round. Yeah.
I believe that is me. Hold up. I'll take my POS verbally, please, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'll start this debate in 3, 2, 1. We think in the stage in which a lot of children are developing, which is to say teenage stages, this is the time exactly when we need to start doing things like setting boundaries and giving them better responsibilities that adapt to this type of age. So let me start off by giving you our model in which a bit of context on what we are debating about today. So let's talk about the stakeholders. Who are these people? That means that we have things like parents, which are basically adults, so the guardians that take care of these children, which means they have a lot of responsibility on taking care of them, and they are overall responsible for a lot of the growth and development within this child. Then we have the second stakeholder, which is teenagers, which age around from like 13 to 17. So during this type of period, they are in massive development phases. That means, yes, they still need guidance and support, which we think that they receive from things like friends as well as parents, or maybe possibly even teachers. But it's also a phase in which they start taking more responsibility to prepare them in the future and to take more independent actions. So in the status quo, as a teen, they would most likely be looking for things like decision making within academics, or maybe social activities, or things like part-time work. So then we tell you, what does our world then look like, giving you this context? So when we have these teenagers and these adults setting more boundaries and setting more responsibilities for these children, that looks like where they're going to have this open communication and have this discussion to see what level of responsibility they can take without having too much stress. So, for example, some people who might have more special conditions or mental illnesses or have more personal feelings about this opinion, they're then going to have to discuss this with their parents to come up with an ideal idea of what type of responsibilities work for both child and parent. Then we also tell you that it's going to look like things where we have clear boundaries and expectations that are set, meaning things like curfews, screen time limits, and academic goals. We tell you we obviously consider things like parenting styles, which looks like parents who may be helicopter parenting or tiger parenting, where they attempt to adapt to their child's needs and hear them out rather than making maybe decisions for them within our world, which is much better world for the child to develop in. Giving you some more context on this, that means that parents provide a lot of consistent emotional support, where they acknowledge a lot of development stages as a period of heightened emotional sensitivity due to, let's say, maybe hormonal changes or social pressure, meaning and looking like things, for example, peer influence and identity formation. So we then tell you, unlike a lot of uninvolved parenting, which may force teenagers to self-regulate without support, this model actually offers a lot more guidance within our world through challenges like stress or conflict, which prevent a lot of role reversal or parentification. We then tell you finally, parents are going to then obviously give this more responsibility and autonomy for higher capacity for independence, which looks like things like maybe chores or like type of part-time jobs. Now, this obviously does not mean and looks like adult responsibility, which looks like maybe financial issues within the home that a child has to deal with as well. Now, giving you this context and setup of this debate, I will now move on to my arguments. My first main argument here is that we encourage more independence within our world. So a lot of these teenagers, when they're developing and stepping into their own world, where choices are not just options but opportunities to shape their identity, we then allow them to make a lot of these decisions by themselves, like choosing their extracurricular activities or planning a weekend outing. So they experience this thrill of autonomy that isn't just about freedom, but also learning to trust themselves and understanding how to develop themselves within the near future. So a teen managing their own schedule and how they might decide to prioritize studying for, let's say, exams over hanging out with friends allows them to build a lot of their decision-making skills, but also teaches them about many consequences when trying to balance things that they enjoy in life with a lot of responsibility. So when they see the result of a lot of their choices, whether good or bad, they start to understand the weight of the decisions. So we then tell you that the impact of this is when they make a lot of these choices, their self-resilience emphasizes and gets stronger. They then begin to realize that they can handle a lot of challenges when they're making more when they're making more equipped to face the uncertainties of a lot of adulthood that comes up after this period of growth. So this journey then gives them a lot of things like resilience and teaches them a lot of skills within life. Now, before I continue, are there any POIs? 3, 2, 1. I'm taking that as a no. So I'll now move on to my second argument, is how not only then do we allow them to try to develop this resilience and this self-understanding of themselves and how they can trust themselves, we then tell you that they build a lot of confidence. So we tell you confidence looks like something that the more it's kind of used, the stronger it then gets. So when teenagers are treated as a lot of capable individuals, they start to believe in their own potential. So we then think that looks like a teen who feels heard in, like, let's say, family discussions may give them more self-esteem or like transform their self-image. So consider a scenario where a teenager is then asked to, let's say, share their opinion during a family meeting about vacation plans. So when their ideas, let's say for a teenager, are more appreciated, they then feel more valued and empowered. So acts like this then create a more inclusion where they can give more confidence that extends beyond just the family sphere, but outside as well. So this confidence then leads to like a lot of massive changes. So let's say we think that in things like school, they might take on more leadership roles in group projects or participate in discussions more actively, or socially, they're then going to become more willing to approach peers and form a lot more connections that actually enrich their lives. So this effect of this confidence can lead to a lot of academic success and add on to a lot of their current skills within life. We then tell you finally, we think the final key factor is that it enhances a lot of responsibility. That is to say that responsibility isn't just about chores, it's about cultivating a sense of like ownership over one's actions. So when teenagers are then given this responsibility, we then think they learn that their contributions actually matter. So we then think a teenager, like let's say, for example, who might be assigned to do chores once a week, which may look like preparing dinner once a week. This might seem as daunting, but as they experiment with, like, let's say maybe recipes and manage their time better, they then also learn a lot of valuable skills. So we then tell you the final impact of all these arguments we give you today is that as they take on these tasks, they develop a strong sense of a lot of accountability within their lives, which then prepares them for a lot of complexities of adult life, whether it's from like managing a job, maintaining relationships, handling financial stress and finances. It all requires a mindset that they had to do, especially when they were growing up as children. And we then tell you that they're going to then be able to understand the importance of a lot of follow-throughs and rewards that come out from fulfilling a lot of commitments. Our final say here is that then, especially because these are children that are still developing, that are still growing, this is a perfect time to then implement a lot of these things. because then they're going to obviously be able to prepare themselves for the future in the long-term run. So therefore, based on everything we told you today, this is why we strongly stand with the motion and we're proud to propose. Thank you.
I think to the first proposition, for the final remarks, not like to invite first opposition.
I prefer my POIs verbally. We believe children should be treated as children, and parents should take responsibility for their children. 2 pieces of framing and rebuttal, and then I'll be moving on to my points. First, some quick rebuttals. The examples given by Prop are not examples of adultifying a child. They're literally describing the status quo. They give you examples of screen times and boundaries. All these things already happen in the status quo, perhaps even to children. Prop cannot argue that they receive benefits of adultification if they're giving barely any responsibilities. They also paint this perfect world where parents will support their children fully and emotionally. But Judge, the motion clearly states that it will treat them as adults. This means that there will still be a significant drop in the support because they're expected to be more independent. Prop cannot guarantee this support because parents are not trained mentors, and not every family has the luxury time or knowledge to guide teens through the adult level responsibility. And 3, how would you guarantee on your side that these teenagers and parents will open up and have what you call conversations about setting boundaries? And many teenagers can't even manage talking about drama with their own friends, such as family dinner talks. I think that will pressure more teenagers just to be open about everything and say something that will long-term harm them. In fact, children are more likely to represent their parents in Prop's world because they feel like they were just thrown into the deep end. And 4, just because the teenagers learn these responsibilities now doesn't mean that they can handle it and be mentally prepared. And 5, they said that the teenagers can build resilience and many life skills, but you don't teach a kid to swim and by pushing them into the ocean. You give them lessons first, and that is unique to the status quo. Furthermore, stress doesn't equal to skill. Even if they can handle these problems, it doesn't mean that they should. Now, moving on to some framing. 1. Prop has to defend a world where parents adultify past general exposure that is practiced in the status quo. This looks like A. Making independent decisions about where they spend their money on, about school. B. Expected to manage their own finances, such as part-time jobs, managing their own schedule, or solving conflicts on their own. C. Parents provide less support emotionally and practically, just like they would do to a child who is of age. D. This looks like a 15-year-old working jobs to buy food, having to raise their younger siblings. E. They're expected to make their own legal decisions. So, 2. Note that even though Prop adultifies their teenagers, this teenager will still have the average teenager responsibilities, which is inherently stressful already. This looks like worrying about their grades and academics, interpersonal conflicts and drama with their friends or families, and anxiety over which degree you will take or college admissions. Essentially, Prop adds on even more concerns to the teenagers to the ones that already exist. Now, moving on to my arguments. So my first argument is that it harms teenagers. It forces them to make decisions they're not ready for. So teenagers' brains are not fully developed. Our brains are not fully developed until we're 25. The prefrontal cortex is not mature and stable to handle the adult responsibilities and make high-stake decisions when they're not ready. For example, caring for finances, life-altering academic choices, or personal choices. And also, when teens are able to more likely act impulsive or misjudge and vulnerable to struggle within the long-term carrying weight. So choices equal to the maturing reasoning that aren't developed yet in the teenagers as opposed to the adults or individuals who are 20. That is the natural science behind the kids. And these teenagers have a lot going in there, probably with their friends, having to get good grades, finding themselves as people, managing different subjects as school, or even family life. Why would it be justified and logical for us to put more burden on them, on why have their own agenda going on and their own fights they have to fight through? So the status quo is that parents might be able to say that they're doing the right thing for the child and they know the best interest. But even if we say that, the fact is many parents don't realize that their choices aren't always the best for the child. And at a stage where teenagers are most vulnerable and the most open to become sensitive to any little minor thing, this isn't proven. The impact right now in the status quo at an age where teenagers should be curious and exploring their own interests and finding their journey as teenagers, not carrying tests on their back. When we force the adult decisions into children, we're creating so much unnecessary stress and anxiety competitions. Now imagine slapping adult burdens into these vulnerable people. Why are we adding so much adult worries like managing money or caregiving, making their lives more miserable? How's this preparation? This is clearly exploitation that looks like teaching them life lessons. And we're also protecting these teenagers before they're ready. Pushing responsibilities too early could cause long-term harm and trauma under these teenagers that they can't grasp all of it yet. Taking on big responsibilities means that these teenagers will have toxic coping mechanisms that for the long term will damage their ability. These adult responsibilities are open to teenagers having exposure to long-term stress, burnout, and harm in the brain development of these adolescents, such as anxiety or depression. When teenagers are supposed to develop confidence and encourage them on themselves, they shut down and feel emotionally unsupported in a status quo that already challenges them. So if opposition wants to come in and say they're supposedly want to give teenagers their better treatment and higher independence on the status quo, environment lifts them and they need gradual exposure. This is psychologically harmful to the children by taking away their childhood and forcing adulthood upon them. Yes.
How is your world any better when we at least offer parents who attempt to interact and understand these children while you still have things like tiger parenting and helicopter parenting who think what's best for their children existing in your world?
Because in the status quo, they're not being thrusted into adulthood. So even parents like tiger parents help their kids in better ways. So now continuing on. Now I'll be going into my second argument. Shifts responsibilities from the parents to the child. So our first layer is that teenagers are in the part of life where they're most quote unquote devious and rebellious. We're already seeing teenagers doing things like sneaking out, skipping school, and things like that. Now imagine if we give parents an excuse to say, it's not my fault because my teenagers should act like an adult. If we treat teenagers as adult, we lower the threshold for punishing them. Which leads to, this is already happening in schools and criminal justice systems. Imagine how much worse it'll get if this is actually justified. If we assume they're fully developed and rational, we expose them to the adult consequences that they are not ready for, nor do they understand, leading them to do things that are irresponsible if we give them full responsibility. This is not teaching responsibility. This is more like parentification, a type of emotional neglect where the child acts more like parents and have to take on the role of an adult. Many of the cases, it's from a result of parental absence, hardships, or even pressure culturally, where these decisions teenagers are given, where there are decisions teenagers are given. This is made worse because the children in Pop's role are treated like a children, but they are suddenly treated as adults once they reach their teenage ages. This will be a major shift that children will struggle to adapt to. So many teens
Time.
then say that they're 18 or 20 years old and they have to feel like they're in a proper childhood. So this impacts and will make their life worse. I've never been more proud to oppose. Thank you.
According to the first opposition for the fine speech, quick reminder everyone, please do keep timing your own self, or at least you put attention on the chat. So I will remind you in case the time is over. So yeah, second prop, here.
If I have everyone's attention, I'll start my speech in 3, 2. Opposition has clearly completely ignored our model and continues to talk about how these teenagers will be vulnerable and exploited in our world. However, we never said that these teenagers are adults. We already said that they still need guidance, support, received from friends as well as parents. We also said that clear boundaries and expectations will be set, such as curfews, screen time limits, and academic goals. Now we move on to my rebuttals. Firstly, opposition said that children should be children and adults should be responsible for their children. However, the claim that adults should be responsible for their children implies that adultifying teenagers undermines parental duty. However, we think that adults, on the contrary, adultifying models enhance parental responsibility by preparing teenagers for independence. While this happens, like stated in our model, parents will still remain responsible for providing guidance, boundaries, setting boundaries, and ensuring safety of their children. But they shift from yeah. So on to my second rebuttal. Opposition also said that these children may not be mentally prepared for these responsibilities, and we may be putting too much stress on them. However, this overlooks that adultifying models are not about burdening teenagers with unmanageable tasks, but about gradually introducing responsibilities in a supportive environment. Parents will continue to provide support, guidance, and feedback, as well as safety nets, to ensure teenagers are not overwhelmed like we already have enforced in our model. For instance, allowing a teenager to plan something basic, such as a family outing with a certain level of budget, already teaches them financial responsibility without the pressure of managing finances, taxes, or whatever you guys said these students will be stressed of. And if they have challenges, parents can step in to provide guidance, which ensures that they're not mentally stressed or pressured. Opposition also said that we're adding even more responsibilities for these teenagers who already have many responsibilities, such as grades, academics, and more. This could However, we think that by facing these manageable challenges, such as the example we gave earlier, or just a part-time job after school, teenagers develop the necessary emotional regulation and adaptability, which will help them handle academic pressures more effectively currently, as well as pressure from work in the future. Now on to my arguments. Firstly, reducing entitlement and promoting work ethic. By assigning teenagers meaningful responsibilities, such as a part-time job, household contributions, or more, adultifying models implement a strong work ethic and reduces entitlement. This teaches these children that they may not always be babied through their entire life, right? So they have to work for what they want. Teenagers learn the value of effort and accountability. Unlike in opposition's overly protective models, where these teenagers may expect things to just be done for them, which is extremely unrealistic. This fosters a sense of entitlement that hinders adult success. Why is this important? A strong work ethic is a critical factor of success in adulthood, whether in careers, relationships, or personal goals. And by adultifying teenagers, um, um, these teenagers develop habits such as perseverance, time management, and goal setting, which will benefit them a lot in the long term. As an example, a teenager who balances school and a part-time job learns to prioritize tasks, a skill that translates directly to the workplace. This foundation prepares them to navigate competitive environments in the future, such as jobs or in university, where self-discipline is extremely essential. And we think that by exposing these teenagers to these responsibilities at a young age, when they grow up, when they go to university, it'll be much easier for them to adapt to the adult life. If teenagers are not encouraged to develop a good work ethic, they may remain dependent on parents or external support systems, even into adulthood. And by shielding them from responsibilities or providing unearned rewards, this can lead to prolonged sense that they don't need to work for the things they get. An example of this is a teenager who's used to receiving allowances without even contributing anything, and this will have a detrimental effect in the long term. On to my second argument: encouraging emotional maturity. Adultifying parenting models expose teenagers to real-world emotional challenges, such as handling job reviews, job interviews, working with people at work, or navigating relationships at work. And by facing these challenges, by facing these situations with parental guidance rather than overprotection, teenagers build resilience and emotional intelligence. The models that emphasize their teenage status often shield them from such experiences, potentially stunting their ability to manage complex emotions when they become adults. Adult responsibilities also require emotional regulation and adaptability. Teenagers are not exposed to emotional challenges, may struggle with tasks like managing deadlines or receiving criticism, leading to poor performance in academic or professional settings. Why is this true? Adult responsibilities, such as maintaining employment, managing finances, etc., often involve high-stakes situations that trigger strong emotions, including frustration or anxiety. I'll take it later. Emotional regulation, which is the ability to manage and respond to these emotions correctly, is essential in the future as well as in the present. I'll take your BOI now.
How is your world different from ours if in our world we also have curfews, screen time, and goals and things like planning family outings already existing?
What? So we proposed that we introduce these teenagers with like jobs and everything. And I don't think that's in your world because currently this is the current in the status quo, these parents still treat their teenagers as children, right? Like your parents are not like the average parent does not expect their teenager to plan these trips or get a part-time job, but they do it if they want to, right? But we propose that these parents like it becomes a standard, like these teenagers should be doing it. Onto my third argument. Identity formation. Parenting models that adultify teenagers by involving them in a meaningful adult-like responsibilities facilitate identity formation. By treating teenagers as young adults capable of shaping their own path, these models encourage them to explore their values, passion, and goals, helping them develop a strong sense of self. This helps them find a job in the future or discover their passion. So for example, when they get to university or work, they know what they want to do. Unlike models that emphasize treating these teenagers as young children, they're unable to. This delays self-discovery. In conclusion, I've told you how adultifying teenagers promotes work ethic, encourages emotional maturity, and how that it will benefit them in the long run. And these are all things opposition simply just cannot provide. Therefore, after everything I've told you today, it's clear that proposition should win this debate and the motion should stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Second proposition for the fine speech. Next to second opposition.
Okay. I'll take POIs verbally, and if I'm audible and visible, I'll start my speech on my first word. Panel, every example they gave us already happens in our world. They're literally supporting our status quo. 3 responses to their 3 main points. Number 1, they tell us that this builds confidence. First, confidence is only built when teens succeed, but adult-level responsibilities come with this high risk of failure. For example, managing money, making legal decisions. When they fail, which will obviously happen because they're teenagers, it backfires. And what this leads to is it leads to shame, anxiety, leads to self-doubt, things like that. Secondly, confidence built on this false maturity is so fragile. If they feel forced to act grown up before they're even ready, which proposition literally admits to because they tell us they're going to force them to take jobs, they'll internalize unrealistic expectations. And when they can't live up to these expectations, it damages long-term self-esteem. And lastly, even if some teens feel confident in the short term, our world builds this real confidence very slowly by letting teens gradually learn, and they can fail in safe environments in their safety nets and grow at their own pace. And panel, we tell you that is so much more sustainable. Now, moving on to their second point about how we're not pushing responsibilities because parents and teachers will help them. Number one, in reality, many teens do not actually get this ideal support. Why? Because kids in low-income families or unstable homes often have to figure out things themselves because their model puts the most vulnerable people at a so much greater risk. Look, the harms go so much deeper than that. Just look at the countries that allow young teens to work full-time and participate in child marriages. For example, look at India. This system of parenting will only further reinforce the abuse of these young girls, where they're literally actively being forced into marriages at the age of 13 or 14. And this system of parenting is justifying it because this is because that the cultures that sexualize minors rationalize this by saying that, oh, you're mature for your age, or it's normal for teens to take up these responsibilities because you're supposed to act like an adult. This is what adultifying does. Many young girls in India, they're already being forced into child marriages, and they're expected to be treated as adults. This is justified. This abuse is justified. We are literally encouraging the culture of child marriages. And judge, don't buy whatever they say about how this is a minority. There are millions of child rights around the world. This is an actual serious problem, judge. Secondly, the motion clearly states that it will treat them as adults. This means that there will be a significant drop in this support because they are expected to be more independent. This means less support. That is literally the definition of independence. Proposition cannot guarantee the support because parents are not trained mentors, they're not trained professionals, and not every family, as I've already told you, has the luxury of time or knowledge to guide teens through adult level responsibility. Okay, and let's be very charitable and say, yes, they do get perfect parents. They do get all the support in the world. Judge, they underestimate the gap between guidance and actual lived experience. Just helping doesn't mean teens won't still be overwhelmed by these adult pressures like financial responsibility or managing relationships. Again, we tell you that the brains are only fully developed when you're 25 years old. Imagine a 13-year-old taking on the responsibility of something that a 22-year-old can't even take on. Don't forget, panel, these people are teenagers. What makes you think I will talk to my mom about potential career prospects when I don't even tell her what the name of my best friend is? And lastly, they tell you about boundaries and expectations like curfews, screen time, goals, family outings, things like that. Judge, that is not adultification. That is literally standard parenting. Even protective parents, or target parents as they call them, they set goals and they set boundaries. All of this already happens in the status quo. They tell you that average parents don't force kids to do part-time jobs. So on their side, they want to normalize parents forcing kids to take on jobs when they're already burdened by so many things like schools, socializing, family problems, and then they want to force them to take on a job they don't want to. How harmful is that, panel? Okay, now moving on to my second response to this, real adultification is actually about decision-making authority and burden, not just rules. So giving these teenagers credit card bills or full independence is way too early to go. And this just goes far beyond setting boundaries or telling you, oh, like your screen time is only 2 hours a day. My mom already tells me that every single day, panel. Even if some boundaries are healthy, their world blurs the line so much because teens will internalize this pressure to act older than they are, even with the surface level boundaries. Okay, now moving on to my actual argument about how gradual responsibility is so much better than adultification. Judge, we tell you the best way to prepare teenagers for adulthood is not by treating them like adults right now, but by gradually exposing them to adult responsibilities with support and safety net while still treating them like children. We already tell you, our brains are not developed until we are 25. Now, imagine, panel, forcing the responsibilities you carry right now, like financial responsibilities, taking care of the people around you, etc., etc. To me, a teenager, would I be able to handle it? No, I won't. And what putting the adult stress on teenager brains lead to burnout, it leads to anxiety, it leads to them making bad decisions. And what happens when they make these bad decisions? Who gets blamed in the end? In their world, it is not the parents who pushed these responsibilities upon them. It is not society who pushed these responsibilities upon them who is getting blamed in this situation, but the child. So instead, panel, prefer our world because we tell you that gradual exposure is so much better because gradual exposures allows teens to learn without collapse. Let them make small financial decisions before managing full budgets. Let them have input in school and career choices, but with adult guidance. Let them do chores or resolve conflicts, but at least give them a safety net, Judge. For example, a teen can learn budgeting by managing like a summer job or allowance, but why are we expecting them to have a full-time job at 16 and for every 16-year-old in the world to have a full-time job or even a part-time job? Because if that is something that they don't want to do, why are we forcing a child to work? Another example would be teens start learning to drive under supervision before they're allowed to drive solo on their own. This is a clear case of gradual responsibility with support, not immediate adult level autonomy. And yes, we acknowledge this model is not perfect. We'll be very charitable and say that yes, even in our world, not all teenagers grow up perfectly prepared. And yes, some 18-year-olds still rely heavily on their parents. They still make poor choices in university or in work. But this doesn't mean the model is broken. It just shows you how hard adulthood is. And that is even more reason why we should protect teens while they're still learning. And it proves that we shouldn't shove more responsibility earlier. Because if some teens already struggle when they're 18, 22, any ages like that. What happens when we force them on 14-year-olds, on 13-year-olds to act like adults? All this will just amplify those struggles. So what have we told you on why props role is worse? Number one, props throws them into deep water without teaching them to swim. Secondly, they frame adultification as giving teens independence. It's just neglect disguised as empowerment. And thirdly, teenagers get blamed for failures they're not yet equipped to handle. This creates long-term trauma, resentment towards parents, a fear of responsibility. And lastly, all of the examples they gave right now already happens in the status quo, and the only one that doesn't is forcing everyone to take a job, and that is just so harmful. For all these reasons, I am so proud to oppose.
Thank you, second op, for the fine speech. Not like to welcome third proposition.
I'll take my POIs verbally, and my preferred pronouns are she, her. If I have everyone's attention, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. In today's changing world, the way we approach parenting can significantly influence the development of teenagers. Parenting models that adultify teenagers recognize their capacity for responsibility, decision-making, and independence. These approaches actually prepare them for adult life, unlike opposition's model. In this speech, I'll be doing two things. Firstly, I'll be giving a few rebuttals to side opposition, and secondly, I'll be weighing the debate. Allow me to start my speech with a few rebuttals. The first speaker said that teenagers need guidance since they're still young, and parents will not be providing this guidance. However, although we acknowledge that teenagers need guidance since they're in their developing stage, in our world, we still have guidance from parents. Because it's not like parents are going to be leaving these teenagers forever and dumping them in a pool of responsibilities that adults are supposed to complete when they're still teenagers. Parents obviously still care for their children, and they will offer support that they need while teaching a sense of independence. If teenagers may feel too much stress, parents can change the amount of responsibility and independence that they're giving to the teenager, and they can adjust according to the child. In our world, we have balanced guidance. Parents are supporting their teenagers while still allowing them to take on responsibilities, so teenagers can go through these challenges and learn from their mistakes by themselves. When they need help or advice, they can still ask their parents, but they should be making their own choices, which will prepare them for challenges in the real world when they become adults. The first speaker also said that teenagers may feel a lot of stress. However, we are slowly building up the amount of responsibility over time as they get older. We're not shoving all the responsibilities that adults are supposed to be taking on all at once. Even in the worst case scenario that teenagers may feel a little bit of stress in the process, the much worse comparative on opposition is that when these teenagers reach adulthood, they aren't prepared at all, and they're just going to be dumped in a pool of responsibilities without knowing what to do, since they haven't been trained to do this when they were younger. The third thing that the first speaker said was that teenagers will have to manage their own legal responsibilities. However, we believe that this is taking it a step too too far. We're giving teenagers a bit like some more responsibility than when they were younger children, but we're not making them manage all their legal responsibilities by themselves. Like I said before, parents will still be there to support them. The second speaker said that everything that we're saying in our world already happens in opposition's world. I'd like to clarify that at the early teen stages, we may start with things like curfews or planning teenage outings, but then as they get older, we will raise the amount of responsibility and independence they get. Opposition is over exaggerating the amount of responsibility that we are giving to these teenagers. We are dumping them in all these adult responsibilities, or even if we do, it's with parental help. We think opposition are over exaggerating what adulting teenagers are. This debate clearly clarifies that what we give them isn't a massive or stressful task, and it isn't a task that we clearly understand that they're not capable of. The main point we're trying to bring out within this debate is how only in our world do our parents able to open up to their children, and that children, especially in teenage years, are able to receive this development support more than anyone else. Lastly, the second speaker said that on their side, they will propose more gradual exposure. However, that's basically supporting on our side because, like stated in the info slide, in opposition's world, they're supposed to be refraining from giving teenagers adult responsibilities. She gave an example of letting teenagers pay part of the financial bills. However, this is an adult responsibility, which is what we're proposing on our side. We're proposing to let slowly let teenagers do things such as pay their bills with parental help so that they can learn to do this when they go to adulthood. Now I'll be moving on to weighing. So the first clash of that I've identified is which side better prepares the teenagers for adulthood, which is the goal that we have on side proposition and side opposition. So what are the characteristics of adulthood? You need to have independence and self-reliance because you should be able to make your own decisions, manage your financial responsibilities, etc. You have to have responsibility and know the consequences of your actions. And if you do something wrong, you have to face your own consequences. You have to have maturity, and you have to know how to deal with stress because when you go into adulthood, you'll probably face a lot of stress more than in your teenage years when you're mostly facing friendship issues and that stuff. And there are many other characteristics of adulthood where it requires you to rely on yourself and not your parents. So what will the teenagers in opposition's world look like when they get thrown into adulthood? Since parents have basically been helping them make their decisions their entire life, spoon feeding them and taking most of the responsibility. When these teenagers in opposition's world suddenly reach adulthood, everything will be completely new to them and they will have to do everything by themselves, which they aren't familiar with. For example, they will have to meet the financial decisions or the legal decisions that they have to make, but they have no experience. So it will be a lot harder for them to adapt. But what do the teenagers in our world look like? The teenagers in our world are somewhat prepared for adulthood since parents have been helping them and training them to go to adulthood. These teenagers have had practice making decisions for themselves, and they know what it looks like and feels like to have all this independence, all this responsibility, and the fact that they have to make decisions themselves. Um, in in our world, these teenagers have been building up the amount of responsibilities, right? They're starting with smaller responsibilities such as curfews and screen time limits and stuff like that. And then it will slowly build up to bigger and bigger responsibilities so that when they finally turn 18, they're actually ready for adulthood and they're ready for the future in the long term. What we give you in our world is what we give teenagers in our world is life skills, things like life skills, self-confidence, and self-responsibility, which is going to be harder to adapt as you get older. And what we also give you in our world that we tell you in our world that we are able to prepare these teenagers at the right time and the right phase. So lastly, I'll give a quick clarification of what our world would look like, clarifying the first speaker, right? So in our world, we will have open communications and discussions, so parents can discuss with their teenagers what level of responsibility they're comfortable with and what level of independence they're comfortable with, so they're not just thrown into the deep end and expected to deal with all the responsibilities by themselves. The most efficient and effective way in which all parents are going to try to communicate and discuss with their children. Parents will be providing consistent emotional support, acknowledging development stages as a period of heightened emotional sensitivity due to hormonal changes and social pressures such as peer influence and identity information. Parents will be giving children the right guidance at the right phase, not when they're too young and not when they're too old and unable to adapt as fast. We say that in our world, we are actually preparing these teenagers in the long term for all the adult responsibilities in the long run, while opposition is simply just focusing on the uh, short-term losses that the teenagers may be feeling. In conclusion, we have told you about how on our side we give teenagers independence, responsibility, confidence, and many other strong arguments. Never been more proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, third proposition. For the final speech, I'd like to invite opposition's whip.
Okay, I prefer verbal POIs if there are any, and I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we need to be very clear. Prop cannot come in and argue that adultification is giving them some kind of a budget or choices under supervision, because that's what status quo is. In status quo, parents can still give them weekly allowances. This debate, though, has to make prop push beyond the status quo for what they have to win. Panel, if you still don't agree with us that prop has to defend like making legal decisions and like taxes, it's fine because we'll be more charitable at this point. But prop has to defend an increased amount of autonomy for teenagers with significantly less supervision. This would have to look like independently choosing which degree they join, working part-time jobs after school, and this is why prop loses, because they refuse to move beyond status quo. One, prop's examples are just setting screen time limits and having family conversations. That's not adultification, that's what most households look like. They still defend a soft status quo from the first bench, and not that this model in the motion demands it. It's a shift like past normal teenage exposures to like full-on expectations that are high. Secondly, they paint a world where like teens can take on these responsibilities and still get constant support at the same time, better in that way. But let me tell you something, you can't have it both ways, because by definition you have to reduce that support. In their world, teens are expected to more act like they are. They don't even have the tools or the mature enough life experiences yet. Thirdly, they rely on vagueness on open conversations. But how do we ensure that every parent is emotionally open to that? They assume every family and every teenager can have a healthy discussion and have a balanced or like successful outcome. But in the real reality, parenting is already messy and they're unequal, and their model from the start has no safeguards for those pressures or other instances. Which parenting model better respects these teenagers and their development capacity? They tell you two things. Teenagers are capable of taking more responsibilities, and this helps them build real-world skills. I think respecting these teenagers on like giving them something they can is not giving people burdens that they're not ready for. It's giving them the time to grow. I think we told you, because these teens' brains, they don't mature until they're like 20, their rational decision making in the first place is usually under pressure. And then prop says real world preparation. It's actually a harm to their development. Secondly, they say that adult choices teach resilience. It moreover teaches these teenagers regret for their choices, especially when they mess up on the small things like relationships or taking care of their academics and their choices. That mistake is a trauma for them that they have to long-term face. Thirdly, prop says that they're empowering teens. They throw them into the water without a life jacket. We aren't up yet. We still have a structure and a gradual exposure. We still have lessons with nets and not responsibilities that carry more on their backs. We give responsibility that goes with their maturity and age, and that way they're more exposed to not burning out or having breakdowns in the long term. Their whole model is rushing these teenagers, while our side, we're giving them more responsible choices. Now, which parenting model leads to better, like, long-term outcomes for these teenagers? They tell you early responsibility leads to like resilience and independence and better prepare for like adulthood. We tell you that their world causes more harm on that because they force these teenagers to grow up too fast, and that way they're sacrificing teenagers' health and their own development. We would rather have a teenager focus on their journey rather than having all these skills to become an adult, or having to have those skills that aren't ready for their brain yet. We told you that they tell you that their model makes more like duties and it looks like part times, or maybe like raising younger siblings, or like even managing that trauma without guidance. And that way, it's not really empowering. It's more emotionally and psychologically damaging for them as individuals. We told you that there are consequences when young individuals, like teenagers, have to face these like premature or pre requisite stress, and these years are not meant for survival and for growth because they're already gonna be in that in adulthood, and we rather have them in adulthood not managing that trauma they experienced back when they're teenagers. Secondly, even in our world, teens might have that growing exposure like deadlines for school or like opportunities where they have to lead when they're not really a leader, or having to navigate those friendship issues. We give them a space without consequences to naturally just let them grow. Prop, on the other hand, the world is exposing that with like having knowing the fact that they can punish failures and stuff. On our worst scenario, on their side, there's more justification for like worse outcomes for these children and these teenagers, and exploiting their like decision making at such a young age. While that seems extreme, yes, it is, because the logic is once you treat these teenagers more than they are right now, you can open the door for more inequalities, and especially for individuals who aren't able to manage. In our world, we allow more safeguarded like development for these teenagers while also guarding their health, and have a gradual path towards adulthood. On their hand, teenagers have the weight of more than they have with no tools and like a lack of support. One, we already told you that these teenagers are not emotionally ready for these big decisions. Secondly, their stress already leads to bigger trauma that they have to deal with in the long term, and less coping mechanisms for adulthood. Thirdly, their childhood and teenager journey becomes like a resource for like adulthood. Thirdly, then we tell you that they shift the burdens and they provide such a small status quo and they have a lackey model. In our world, we let teens explore with guidance in their own journey. Secondly, that the support still remains consistently, and there are boundaries that protect and not restrict them from like growing or finding their own journey. And we lastly prioritize their development over having such a rushed journey. The thing is, we don't treat these teens like more than they are because we believe to prepare them for adulthood or whatever when they grow up. It's not just throwing them into situations where they deal with more than they can. It's about allowing them to prove themselves by looking on their journey or being able to make those decisions that they can without the pressure of like, oh, you have to think big now, or you have to like go and move forward out of your teenager mind. I think prop had to prove why adultifying these teens can lead to better, more capable individuals in the long term. But we've already told you this can lead to more trauma and especially confusion for these teenagers who are already vulnerable at their age and state. For all those reasons, so proud to oppose.
Thank you, opposition's whip, for the fine speech. That's marked the end of the substantive speech. I'd like to invite our reply.
Okay, if I'm audible and visible, my time on my first word. Proposition lost the debate the moment that they told us that adult responsibilities are the best way to prepare kids for the future. This assumes that all teens are equally ready, all parents are equally supportive, and that pressure builds resilience. When in reality, as I've already told you, this builds anxiety, burnout, and long-term harm. Panel, let's be clear. This motion is not about keeping teenagers in a bubble until 18. It's about what the dominant model of parenting should prioritize. The model should treat teenagers as developing minors, not as young adults. That means refraining from dumping full adult responsibilities on them, like financial pressures, decision making, emotional independence, before they're ready. Let's look at what they told us so far in this debate. They told us that giving teens more responsibility builds confidence and prepares them for adulthood. They told us that this responsibility comes with clear expectations, parental guidance, and emotional support. And lastly, they told us that without adultification, these teens are going to be unprepared for life. What do we say? We tell you that in reality, adultification leads to emotional stress, burnout, failure, because not all teens are ready or supported, and that parents are not equal because some are absent, they're overworked, or just simply incapable of offering this ideal support systems. What happens to the children in these families then? Our model protects teens because we allow gradual, soulless exposure to real world experiences without full responsibilities. We refrain from giving them adult responsibilities. Judge, what we teach them is life skills. It is not a contradiction to say they can learn life skills or get a part-time job. Why? Because children already do these things in the status quo, and they do these things as children, not as adults. The current education system already ensures this. Okay, now, I think that the main clash of this debate centers around the fact on who protects these teenagers better. For several reasons why we win. Number one, we reduce harm during the most vulnerable years because they're still developing emotionally and neurologically. And prop tries to make this harm seem very small, make it seem like just stress. But we tell you this is very, very detrimental, very harmful, because giving them adult responsibilities too soon overloads them with pressure they cannot handle. And we let them learn at their own pace. They can help with chores, plan their schedules, but we're not forcing them to work or get financial burden. They also contradict themselves when they tell you that they're not going to force them to do anything. They're not going to like overload them. But the second speaker clearly answered my POI by saying they're going to force everyone to take on a part-time job. And secondly, we protect the most vulnerable teens because in their world, support is assumed. But in reality, many parents, they lack the time, the skills, the resources to support teens through adult problems. And the teens in low-income or unstable homes get pushed into these adult roles early, and they have to hold jobs, care for siblings, and are told it's good for them. We protect the children who are going to be pushed into child marriages because of this adultification, which, by the way, note that they never responded to this argument. Our side prevents lifelong trauma and burnout in kids already under strain. And thirdly, we create a safer environment for failure and learning. Because in our world, teens are allowed to fail safely. They're not punished for acting their age. Because in their world, once you're treated like an adult, mistakes feel heavier, more shameful, because you have to face adult consequences, but you have a teenage brain. So we offer true preparation, not fake independence. Next, on the trade-off, we tell you that the preparation can be built later. Mental health is so hard to repair. You can teach budgeting, responsibility, or job skills in early adulthood. But once a teen experiences burnout, anxiety, or trauma, this damage lasts for years. A 19-year-old who is mentally well, they can catch up. But a 19-year-old who's been emotionally crushed by early responsibility cannot be rebuilt easily. And secondly, the core function of childhood is protection and development. Childhood is meant to be a safe buffer where people can learn gradually, not perform like adults. We don't let kids vote. We don't let them drive, not because they cannot learn it, but because they should not have this burden yet. And keeping that buffer protects their long-term well-being. And thirdly, even if some teens are unprepared, that is a better trade-off. Why? Because a little awkwardness or learning curve at 18 to 20 is normal and manageable, considering that their brain isn't even developed yet. But a 14-year-old working part-time and managing bills is not normal, or nor is it healthy. And we'll rather fix gaps in job skills than fix trauma from losing their childhood. For all these reasons, I'm so proud to oppose.
Thank you. I'll reply for the final remarks. I'd like to invite Rob to reply.
If I have everyone's attention, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition spent their entire speech talking about how these teenagers are not capable of these responsibilities, However, Judge, let me ask you, if these children don't start developing these skills at a young age, how do you expect them to suddenly acquire these skills when they grow up? This is unrealistic. Opposition solely used the statistic that a human brain only fully develops till the age of 18. To the age of 20 till the age of 25. But last time I checked, this does not directly translate into acquiring skills such as emotional intelligence and independence. Now I'll be answering the question, how are we any different from the status quo? The status quo limits teenagers to minimal, routine responsibilities, such as homework or just basic chores at home, to protect them from stress. And this delays independence. However, adultifying models proactively empower teenagers into adult roles, such as leading community projects or managing budgets, tailored to their developmental age. For example, a teenager in an adultifying model might organize a school fundraiser, learning leadership and decision making, while the status quo restricts them to parent-directed tasks like cleaning their own room. And this is the key difference that opposition just didn't understand throughout this debate. Opposition also said that gradual responsibility is much better than adultification that we proposed. Opposition implies that adultification involves abrupt, overwhelming responsibilities, but this is an obvious misconception that we already clarified in our model. Adultifying models are inherently gradual, tailoring tasks to teenagers' developmental stages and providing parental support to ensure their success. Like the examples I gave you earlier, a 14-year-old might start with more simple responsibilities, but by the age of 18 or 16, or when they get older, they might start taking on harder responsibilities. The opposition's approach avoids responsibilities to reduce stress, but this actually just increases stress by leaving teenagers unprepared for adulthood demands and traumas. Without practice in handling challenges, teenagers will obviously face overwhelming stress when they encounter workplace or financial responsibilities later. They said that these teenagers will face trauma having this overwhelming responsibility. However, we just flip this around and say if we don't start from a young age, when they grow up, they will face the exact same amount of trauma. Now I want to our best case, worst case comparison. Opposition's best case scenario is that their teenagers don't have to deal with this stress that comes with adultification, and they have more time to focus on their academics, grades, and more. However, these teenagers fail to develop the necessary emotional intelligence and independence that they need during adulthood. Our worst case scenario is that these children might be stressed due to the increased adult responsibilities, but there are still necessary safety nets to ensure that they do not break down under the pressure. Judge, as you can see, even our worst possible scenario still outweighs opposition's best case scenario. We can offer these children with a chance to experience basic adult responsibilities at a younger age, whilst opposition's best case fails to even offer these teenagers with the emotional development needed in adulthood. Therefore, after everything sad proposition has told you today, it's clear that we should win this debate and the motion should stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Reply, for the final remarks. Let's conclude the debate for this round. Thank you so much, everyone, for the debate. You can just wait here for the announcements, the team that is proceeding to the next round. So yeah, for the judges, let's just move to room 12 for the deliberations. Thank you, everyone.